The sky above Caldwell Park was the color of pewter the morning cauldron got loose, and every man who worked the stables had already run. Nora Vane heard the screaming from inside the house, not the high-pitched noise of a woman, but the deeper, wilder sound of a horse in a fury, hooves on frozen stone, the crack of timber against the yard fence, the shouting of grooms who had retreated beyond the gate and would not come back. She was on her way to light the fires in the east corridor, and she had a box of matches in her apron pocket, and she did not think very much at all, except that the sound was wrong, and no one seemed to be doing anything about it. The kitchen door opened onto the stable yard. She was through it before any other notion caught up with her. Cauldron was 17 hands of gray Andalusian, and he was standing in the center of the yard with his neck arched and his eyes rolling white, steam rising off his flanks in the cold air. The stable boys were against the far fence. Tom Griggs, the head groom who feared nothing on God's earth, had backed himself against the wall of the feed house and was not moving. The horse had broken his own gait in the night. The wood lay in pale splinters across the cobblestones. The sound he made was not the cry of pain, but the cry of something that had run out of patience with the world. Nora set down her firebox on the step. She walked into the yard. She did not run. She did not hold out her hand in a foolish way. She did not speak loudly. She walked to a point about 15 feet from the animal, and she stopped. And she said, in the low voice she used when she was tired and thinking aloud, "I know. It is very cold this morning." The horse swung to face her. She said nothing else for a long moment. The grooms on the far side of the fence had gone entirely quiet. Above them all, in the upper windows of the house, pale faces had gathered. The parlor maid stood there with her cloth still in her hand, the second footman with his collar undone, Mrs. Drummond, the housekeeper who had come down from her room to see what the noise was. Nora did not look at any of them. She looked at the horse, at the precise point between his ears, and she breathed slowly, and she waited. He stamped once. She did not flinch. She said, still in that same low voice, "You are not actually frightened. You are angry. Those are different things." He was looking at her. His ears had come forward. She counted his breaths, which were slowing, and she let her own breathing slow to match. And she thought about nothing in particular, except the cold air, and the smell of frost and sawdust, and the sound of a horse beginning to decide. It took another 10 minutes, during which she stood entirely still, and spoke in that low, patient manner, about nothing important. The quality of the morning, the frost on the cobbles, whether the sky might clear by afternoon. At the end of those 10 minutes, Cauldron walked to her and set his chin on her shoulder, and she put one hand along his neck. And that was all. Edmund Halford, Marquess of Caldwell, had come down from the house sometime in the middle of it. He stood in the doorway to the stable yard in his shirt sleeves in the January cold, and he watched the last of it, the great gray horse dropping his head over the small young woman in the housemaid's cap, and something moved in his chest that he was not at all prepared for. He did not say anything. He went back inside. No one who had watched from the windows forgot what they saw that morning. The story spread through Caldwell Park the way stories always spread in a house that size, from the grooms to the kitchen, and from the kitchen to the upper staff, and from the upper staff to the parlors, each telling adding a small additional detail, the precise color of the horse's eyes when he came to her, the exact stillness of her hands, the way she had spoken to him as one speaks to someone one has known for years and is tired of arguing with. By luncheon, the story had reached Lady Marian, who received it at her writing desk with no visible expression, and then sat very still for a moment with her pen in her hand before resuming her letter. By supper, it had reached Lord Caldwell's steward, who told no one his private thought about it, which was that it was the first time in 3 years something had moved differently around the gray horse. Nora herself heard none of these retellings until the following morning. She spent the rest of that first day as she would have spent any January day at Caldwell, lighting grates and carrying coal and carrying trays and making herself useful to the household's long machinery. She did not think overmuch about what she had done in the stable yard. She had done what had seemed necessary, which was always the most efficient reason for any action. Nora Vane had come to Caldwell Park in the October of the previous year, which made her tenure of 3 months sufficiently brief that most of the upper staff still thought of her as new. She had been a solicitor's daughter in Ipswich until the previous spring, when her father died of a chest infection in April and left a desk full of debts that took the house and most of what was in it. His 2 apprentices had taken over the practice. His sister in Norwich had sent a letter of condolence, and nothing further. There was no second brother to take her in. There was no legacy beyond the ability to read and write well, to keep accounts with precision, to manage a household with care, and to hold her composure in uncomfortable situations. None of these were marketable qualities in a young woman of 22 with no portion and no connections of any consequence. A family friend had known the housekeeper at Caldwell, and so Nora had arrived in October with a single trunk and a reference letter and had been given the east corridor, the morning grates, and a small room under the eaves with a window that rattled in the wind. The house was what she had expected. Large and cold and exquisitely managed, the way the great houses always were, with Lady Marian Halford at its center like a spindle around which the whole machine turned. Lady Marian was 58 and precise, with silver-copper hair arranged without a strand out of place, and a way of looking at the staff that catalogued and filed them simultaneously, as though she were composing an inventory of useful objects. She did not speak unkindly to servants. She simply spoke through them, which was a different and subtler discouragement. The Marquess himself was another matter. Nora had seen him 3 times in 3 months, all at distances. He was tall and dark-haired and moved through his own house as though it required a deliberate act of will to be inside it, which she had attributed to grief. The entire household knew about the late Marchioness, about whom everyone spoke with a kind of careful reverence, the reverence one extends to someone who died before their character could be examined too closely, and was therefore left perfect in memory. Her portrait still hung in the library. Her piano was still in the music room. Lid closed, exactly where she had left it the last morning she was well enough to play. Cauldron had been hers. Everyone knew that too, though it was the kind of knowing that no one spoke plainly aloud. The morning after the Stallion incident, Tom Griggs told the story at the servants' dinner table with the animation of a man who has witnessed something he cannot quite account for. Nora sat at the far end with her bread roll and listened to her own actions described from the outside, which was a peculiar sensation. And it was the housemaid, mind you, Tom said, shaking his head with the bafflement of a man who had spent 30 years with horses and felt his authority quietly diminished. Only the housemaid, standing there in the middle of the yard, talking to that great mad animal, like she was asking him to pass the salt. He said it with something approaching respect, which was clear in his tone. And yet the phrase was the phrase, and it settled in the room and became the shape of her. The housemaid. Only the housemaid. Nora ate her bread roll and said nothing. She was very good at that. What she had not accounted for was that the Marquess had heard the story too. He came to the stables the following afternoon, which was a Sunday and Nora's half-day. And she was in the stable yard for the simple reason that she liked horses, and had always liked them. And Cauldron had decided in the night that she was the only person he trusted in all of Derbyshire. She was brushing his neck when the gate opened, and Edmund came through it in his riding coat and stopped a few feet away and looked at the horse, and then at her. She set down the brush and stepped back and prepared to apologize for being somewhere she had no business being on her half-day, which she clearly had no particular right to be. And he said, "Do not stop on my account." She stopped anyway. He looked at her with those gray eyes that gave nothing away and said, "You are vain." "Yes, my lord." "How did you know to do that? Yesterday morning?" She considered the question, which was a real one and not a polite one. "I did not know," she said. "I thought he sounded less like something frightened than like something furious, and I thought fury generally wants to be witnessed rather than managed." He looked at her for a moment. "Witnessed. I may have been wrong," she said. "You were not," he said. He looked at the horse again. He said, "He was hers," and the 3 words were flat and precise, and cost him something she could measure in the way he did not look at her when he said them. "I know," she said. And then, because it seemed necessary, "I am sorry." He said nothing else. He stood at the entrance to the horse's stall for a minute, not going in and not leaving, and his hand rested on the timber of the doorframe with a deliberateness that was not quite a grip. Then he left the yard. She noticed, as she took up the brush again, that Cauldron had watched him go with an attention the horse gave to very few people. The animal's gaze followed Edmund across the yard and to the gate, and held there a moment after the gate had closed. Nora ran the brush along his neck and thought about that. The way a horse remembers a person. The way grief attaches itself to a living body and does not transfer easily to a different one. She was in the yard another hour before she remembered she had never lit the fires in the east corridor. Lady Marian noticed too, though what she observed was different in kind. She said nothing at first. She was too practiced to say anything at first. Nora began to be aware, over the following 2 weeks, of a quality of attention from the Marchioness that had not been present before, a slight recalibration of the usual invisible calculations. Lady Marian could not have articulated what she observed, because what she observed was too small to put a name to. Only that the Marquess, who usually moved through Caldwell Park without appearing to see anything in particular, had twice now taken a small detour past the east corridor on mornings when Nora was there. That he had asked Mrs. Drummond, the housekeeper, who had lit the library fire yesterday, in a manner that suggested the answer mattered to him. Mrs. Drummond told Nora on a Thursday morning with the studied gentleness of a woman delivering a warning she would rather not give. "Lady Marian asked me directly," she said, her hands busy with the linen closet, not looking at Nora, "whether you had been given any special duties beyond your usual work." She paused. I told her no. "That is correct," Nora said. She also said, and here Mrs. Drummond did look at her, with something careful in the look, that it would not do, her exact words, that it would not do for his lordship to be seen lingering near a housemaid. A small pause. "She is very fond of Lady Frederica. Lady Frederica is a viscount's daughter, and she has a settled manner, and Lady Marian considers the arrangement as good as made." Nora smoothed a pillowcase that did not need smoothing. "I understand," she said. "You are a sensible girl," Mrs. Drummond said, not unkindly. The warning was not lost on her. She understood what she was being told, and she agreed with it, and she tucked the understanding deep where it could not produce any visible distress, and she went on with her day. Only the housemaid. She had known that. She had always known that. What she had not accounted for was how precisely the knowing would hurt when it was spoken by someone who meant it kindly and was therefore beyond argument. In the days that followed, there were small, accumulated moments that she catalogued and dismissed in the same motion, the way one catalogues a thing one cannot use. A morning when she was struggling with a heavy tray of coal at the top of the east stairs, having misjudged the weight, and he appeared at the landing above her and said, without preamble, "Set it down." She set it down. He took it from her without expression, as though this were the logical and obvious action, and carried it to the grate in the library while she followed, feeling obscurely that she had failed some test she had not been warned about. There was a morning in the kitchen garden when she was attempting to bring in herbs through a gate with a broken latch, the cold eating through her thin gloves, and he came through the same gate from the other direction and held it open until she was through, without any particular ceremony. He said, "Someone should fix that." She said, "Yes, my lord." He said, "Tell Griggs." She told Griggs, and the gate was mended by afternoon. And there was an afternoon in the east corridor when she was on a stepladder reaching for a curtain rail that had come loose, which was not her task, but the footman assigned to it had been called away, and the curtain was letting in a draught. And Edmund appeared at the corridor's end, and crossed to her without a word, and steadied the ladder with one hand, and said, "You should have called someone." She said, "I was trying to be quick about it." He said, "Be slower. I would rather the draft than a broken arm." His voice carried no warmth and no personal quality. It was the voice of a man who noticed practical problems and addressed them. She told herself this very carefully. He would have said the same to any member of his household. She was, by any objective measure, lying to herself. She was doing it with great efficiency. She had been lying to herself with great efficiency since she was 18, and her father had taken his first serious cough, and she had told herself it was nothing. It was simply the damp of October. It was a thing that would pass. It was the most practical discipline she possessed, the ability to look at something true and decide firmly and with some conviction that it was probably nothing, that she was probably mistaken, that a thing which looked like one kind of fact was almost certainly a different and more manageable kind of fact. It had seen her through 2 years of reduced circumstances and 1 cold journey to Derbyshire, and 3 months of fires and corridors, and it would see her through this. She went on with her work, and she did not look too closely at the quality of attention in gray eyes, and she did not examine too carefully the reason she had begun to know, without looking, exactly where in any given room he was. Lady Frederica Ashby arrived for her second visit on a Wednesday in late February, and the house rearranged itself around her the way houses do when a figure of consequence descends. All fresh flowers and pressed linens and hushed industry in the upper corridors. Nora ironed the guest room counterpane twice and did not think about it any more than was necessary. Lady Frederica was 24 and very fair, with the particular composure of a woman who has been told since childhood that everything will eventually come to her. She was not unkind in any definable sense. She simply did not see the staff, the way one does not see wallpaper. Not from malice, but from long practice. When she swept through the east corridor on her first morning, she passed Nora without any alteration in her gaze, which was the gaze of a woman thinking about something considerably more interesting than the girl with the dustcloth. Lady Marian received her in the drawing-room, and the sound of their voices, low and certain and pleased with themselves, followed Nora down the hall. She came upon Edmund that same evening in the library, where she had been sent to fetch a volume Mrs. Drummond needed, and he was standing at the window with his back to the room, a folded letter held loosely in one hand. Not reading it, only holding it. His profile was very still against the last gray winter light. The line of his jaw set in a way she was learning to recognize, and she understood in the same quick way she had understood Cauldron that cold January morning that she was witnessing something private and ought to be as quiet about it as possible. She moved carefully. She took the book from the shelf. She was nearly to the door when he said, without turning, "How long did you know what the horse needed before you walked into that yard?" She held the book against her chest. "The moment I heard him," she said. He turned then. He still had the letter in his hand. "Were you not afraid?" "Yes," she said. "I was. I was also more certain than I was afraid, and the certainty was the louder of the two." Something shifted in his face, very small, the barest unguarding of an expression that was usually held very carefully in place. He looked at the letter. "My wife wrote this in December of 1816. She was ill by then. She knew she was ill." He folded it back along its creases with the deliberate precision of a man who has done this same folding many times. "I have not been able to finish reading it. I have managed all but the final page in 3 years." Nora did not say anything. "She bought Cauldron in November of that year," he said. "Against my advice. He was 3 years old and no one could manage him, and the stablemaster told her plainly she was making a mistake." He paused. "She said she trusted difficult things to find their right person eventually." He returned the letter to his breast pocket with the care of someone placing something back in its rightful home, a gesture so habitual she could see he had made it hundreds of times. "She died in March. The fever took her quickly." Nora said quietly. She was right, though. He looked at her. "About difficult things finding their right person," she said. "He found her, and then he waited. And now he seems to have decided again." He was very still for a long moment. Then he said quietly, "Yes, I suppose he has." She left him there with the last of the winter light, and the closed piano, and his wife's letter carried over his heart, and she went down the east corridor with Mrs. Drummond's book and a feeling in her chest that she did not have a word for and did not permit herself to keep. If there is something tender in you, and the ones who stay with a story like this always have it, then you will pause here a moment with her. She is at the top of the east stairs, the book in her hands, and she is 22 years old, and she knows very clearly what she is. She will not let herself forget it. She is quite thorough about that. 3 days later, a kitchen fire broke out in the grate in the servants' hall, which was not a serious fire, more a quantity of panicked smoke and one leaping flame before anyone could think. But it was enough to send one of the younger kitchen maids, Aggie, into a state of rigid fright from which she could not be talked down by any of the other girls, who were trying their best and only making the noise worse. Nora happened to be passing. She went in and sat down next to Aggie on the bench against the wall and did not tell her to stop crying, and did not tell her she was all right. She simply put her hand over the girl's hands, which were clenched in her lap, and waited until the worst of it had passed. And then she said, quietly and specifically, "The smoke is already clearing. Look at the window. There you are." And she sat with her until Aggie's breathing steadied. Edmund was crossing the lower hall when he heard the noise, and came to the kitchen doorway and stood there just long enough to see the small scene through the doorframe. Nora with her hand over Aggie's hands, her voice very low, the specific words inaudible from the corridor. Only the quality of the voice arriving, unhurried and entirely certain. Mrs. Drummond appeared at his elbow, and he stepped back without a word. No one mentioned it to Nora. She did not know he had seen. She knew nothing about the conversation he had with himself in the library that same evening, standing before his wife's portrait in the last of the light, looking at a face he had spent 3 years memorizing every morning as a kind of duty, as though the remembering were itself a form of faithfulness. He stayed there a long time. When he left, he paused at the door of the music room and stood with his hand on the doorframe for a moment, And then he went inside and opened the piano lid for the first time in 3 years and ran 2 fingers along the keys without pressing them. The sound of it carried. Nora heard it from the east corridor and stopped walking, and listened, and did not know what to do with what she heard. Lady Marian sent for her on a Saturday morning in early March. The summons came through Mrs. Drummond, and the formality of it told Nora exactly what it was before she had crossed the threshold. Lady Marian received her in the small morning room, and the room was cold because no fire had been lit, which was not an oversight. Lady Marian sat very upright in the chair by the window, with her hands folded and her silver-copper hair perfect. And she looked at Nora with the particular expression of a woman who is doing something unpleasant because she has decided it is necessary. The face of a person administering a correction they are entirely confident they are right to give. "Miss Vane," she said, "I will be plain." "Yes, my lady," Nora said. "My son is a man of standing and obligation. He is grieving still, and in grief men do not always conduct themselves with perfect prudence. He has been seen speaking to you, on more than one occasion, in a manner that is not appropriate to the distance that should exist between a Marquess and a member of his household staff. I have observed this. Others have observed this." Nora said nothing. "I do not hold you responsible," Lady Marian said, in the tone of a woman who holds everyone responsible. "You are a housemaid, and nothing more, and the attachment my son has formed, such as it is a product of his present state of mind, rather than any settled feeling. Lady Frederica is a woman of family and accomplishment, and she is the correct choice. My son knows this. He has simply allowed himself, for the moment, to be distracted." "I understand," Nora said. "I thought you would," Lady Marian said, and there was something almost approving in it. "I am therefore giving you notice. 3 days. I have arranged a position for you at Harwick Hall in Suffolk, and I will provide a full reference. Mrs. Drummond will give you the particulars." She said nothing further. The interview was over. Nora walked back to her room under the eaves and sat on the edge of her bed for 10 minutes. She looked at the window, which showed a rectangle of pale March sky. She looked at her hands, which were dry and reddened from the winter work, the hands of a working woman, not of a solicitor's daughter or anyone of consequence. Lady Marian was right. She had been right from the first moment she recalibrated her inventory and filed Nora under housemaid, and nothing more, which was the correct filing and the accurate one, and she had no quarrel with the accuracy of it. She thought about the folded letter in Edmund's breast pocket, which she had no right to think about. She thought about the horse in the far field, which she had no right to think about either. She thought about a gate mended because she had mentioned it, and a tray of coal taken from her hands without ceremony, and a voice saying her given name in a doorway under the eaves, and she put all of those thoughts in a careful order, and she acknowledged them. And then she stood up and took her trunk from under the bed and began to fold her things. She was very methodical about it, She had learned, since her father died, that method was the most reliable armor. He found her at it. She had not heard his step on the stair, because she had not expected him there, and the servants' floor was not a place any cause should bring him. And so when the knock came at her open door, she turned, and he was in the doorway, coat on, as though he had come in from outside. And he looked at the half-filled trunk on her bed, and then at her face. And something in his expression went very still, the way things go still when they are about to move. "What is this?" he said. "I have been given notice, my lord," she said. "Your mother has arranged a position for me in Suffolk." "My mother," he said. "She was very direct about the reasons," Nora said. She turned back to the trunk. I think she is right, actually. The position suits the distance better. I should not be here. And you agree with her, he said. She smoothed a folded apron that did not need smoothing. I think your mother understands very well what is appropriate, she said, and I think she is trying to protect the house from something untidy. Nora, he said. She went entirely still. He had never used her given name. Not once. Not in any of the small, accumulated moments of the past weeks. She stood with her back to the trunk and her hands very quiet at her sides. Look at me, he said. She looked at him. My mother does not speak for me, he said. She has never spoken for me, and I should have made that plain to her before she had occasion to speak to you. I have not managed this well. He stepped into the room one step, no more. I have managed nothing well in 3 years. I have held everything at a distance and called that discipline, and it is not the same thing. She could see the shape of the grief in him, the way it lived in his jaw and in the gray of his eyes, the particular exhaustion of a man who has been carrying something alone for a very long time, and is tired now of the carrying. You do not need to explain yourself to me, she said. I need to say something to you, he said, and I am going to say it in the drawing room in front of my mother and Lady Frederica and whoever else is assembled, because otherwise it will mean nothing and be undone in a week. I need you to know it first, so you know the drawing room is coming, and it will not be comfortable, and I am sorry for that. I will not be managing this from a careful distance any longer. She looked at him for a long moment. Outside the small window, the sky had gone the pale gray of late afternoon, and in the distance Cauldron was a dark shape moving across the far field at an easy canter, unhurried, entirely himself. All right, she said. Leave the trunk, he said. She left the trunk. Lady Frederica was in the drawing room that same Saturday afternoon, because Lady Marian had arranged it so, a formal gathering over tea that was meant to feel natural, and was not. Several other guests were present. The baronet's wife from the neighboring estate, who had a quick eye for social weather. Mr. Hartwell, the family solicitor, who had come to attend to papers and was seated near the window with a cup growing cold beside him. Young James the footman, concentrating on the tea service with the careful attention of a boy who has not yet learned to pour without thinking about it. Edmund came through the main door with Nora 2 steps behind him, and the room rearranged itself in the manner of rooms that sense something approaching. Lady Marian looked at Nora and then at Edmund, and the look was the look of a woman who has miscalculated the timing and knows it. Lady Frederica set down her cup. Edmund stood in the center of the room. He did not raise his voice. He said, I want to correct a misunderstanding that has been communicated to a member of my household on my behalf. He looked at his mother, not at Lady Frederica, which was the specific weight of it. Miss Vane is not a housemaid. She is my intended. The room was very quiet. Lady Marian's hands rested motionless on the arms of her chair. The fan she had been holding lay in her lap, and she did not raise it. Lady Frederica looked at her own hands. Something small and resigned moved across her face, the expression of a woman who has understood, quietly, that the arrangement was not as settled as she had been led to believe. It was not outrage. It was, Nora thought, the face of someone who had suspected the truth for some time, and was now relieved to have it confirmed. Lady Frederica was, underneath the composure, a practical woman. Mr. Hartwell looked at Edmund with the careful neutrality of a solicitor who is filing information. James the footman was very carefully looking at nothing at all. Edmund crossed the room and stood beside Nora, and he did not take her hand, because that was not done. Not here. Not before witnesses. And not yet. but he stood close enough that the decision was present in the room without requiring a gesture to make it legible. Lady Marian said after a moment, "Edmund." The word carried the shape of a protest, and the knowledge that the protest had arrived too late. "I am aware that this is not what you expected," Edmund said. "I am aware that Lady Frederica is a woman of considerable quality to whom I owe an apology, which I will give directly and privately." He paused. "I will not allow Miss Vane to be removed from this house on the strength of an understanding I have not consented to. Not on 3 days' notice. Not on any notice." There was another silence, longer than the first. Then Lady Marian unfolded her hands and smoothed her skirt and said, with the measured dignity of a woman who knows when a position has been lost and chooses to lose it gracefully rather than badly, "I see." It was not warmth. It was not approval. It was the collapse of resistance rendered as 2 syllables. And in the world of that drawing room, it was enough. In the weeks that followed, there were adjustments, as there always are when something large has been decided, and the practical world must rearrange itself around the decision. Lady Frederica left the following morning with a note from Edmund that Nora did not read, and did not need to. The baronet's wife from the neighboring estate drove home, and would have a great deal to say to her husband at supper, and would go on saying it, in various configurations, for several weeks. Lady Marian received Nora for a meeting in the morning room, with a fire this time, and the meeting was formal and not warm and not unkind, and Lady Marian said she hoped Nora understood the obligations of the position she was undertaking, and Nora said she did. There was a brief silence in which something shifted slightly between them, and then Lady Marian said, "You are the woman who went into the stable yard." And Nora said, "Yes, my lady." And Lady Marian said nothing further. The expression on her face was a recalibration, the precise and careful adjustment of a woman who had measured something by one set of instruments and was now beginning to understand that those instruments had not been designed for this particular measurement. It was not an apology. It was a beginning of a different accounting. Mr. Hartwell stayed an extra day and attended to several papers, with the quiet efficiency of a man who has managed the affairs of this family for 2 decades and was not surprised by very much. Nora did not move her trunk, which had never been fully packed. The evening after Lady Frederica's carriage had gone, Edmund came to find her in the small sitting room adjacent to the library. She had taken to sitting there in the late afternoon because it was a room without ceremony, one that nobody used very much, with a fire that had been lit for the first time in some months, and 2 small chairs that did not match each other, and a north window that looked onto the formal garden still bare with the end of winter. He sat in the other chair without ceremony, which was how he did most things. They sat without speaking for some time. He was comfortable with silence in a way that most people are not, and she had learned to be. And the room was warm, and the fire made small sounds, and the light outside the window was fading slowly toward dark. Then he reached into the breast pocket of his coat and took out the folded letter. He held it on his knee and looked at it for a moment. He said, "I have read most of it. In 3 years I have managed all but the last page. I kept thinking I was not ready." He paused. "I think I was waiting to have someone to read it to." She did not say anything. He unfolded it to the last page. She could see it was a woman's hand, lighter than his, a little uneven near the end. The writing of someone who was tired when she wrote. He read aloud, not performing the words, simply speaking them in the level voice he used when he was being entirely truthful. Cecily had written that she knew he would think the house could not manage without him watching over it, and that she knew he would stay very busy, which was what he did when he was afraid. She had written that she hoped, when someone appeared who was worth staying for, he would not be so careful of her memory that he forgot to live. She had written that she wanted him to be warm. She had written that she thought him capable of it. She had asked him only to try. He folded the letter back along its creases. He held it a moment longer. Then he set it on the mantelpiece. He did not say anything. She did not say anything. Outside the window, the last of the daylight had gone pale silver above the tree line, and across the formal garden, a quiet snow was beginning to come down, fine and even, covering the bare earth in a steady, unhurried way. She reached out and set her hand on the letter. Just her hand, resting on the folded paper, the way one rests a hand on something that has been kept safe for a long time. After a moment, his hand covered hers. They sat that way while the snow fell outside, and the fire in the small sitting room burned steadily down, and the room grew darker, and neither of them moved to light the candles. In the far field, barely visible through the falling snow, Cauldron moved at a walk along the fence line, unhurried now, and not afraid of anything, simply present in the cold and the quiet dark. He was not frightening anyone. He was exactly where he was supposed to be,